presentation is about to begin.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the conference debate. I'm David Brindle from The Guardian. I'm delighted to be back again to chair this session, which is always great fun, but also makes us think very deeply, I think, about practice, and often more deeply than the wording of the proposition might at first lead you to conclude. The Minister, Caroline Dinenage, yesterday spoke about occupational therapists as, among other things, detectives, educators, visionaries, but are you also researchers? I'm sure we all understand the value of research. It's important to show the efficacy of what you do as therapists, and to make the case, of course, for investing in it. But should that role be central to what you do as practitioners, or is it a very valuable add-on, or indeed is it something that is best done by somebody else? So our proposition today is: this House believes that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner, and is therefore not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. We have two speakers for the motion, Dr. Jenny Preston and Rob Malloy on my left, immediate left, and two against, Professor Avril Drummond and Natalie Jones. Each will speak for 10 minutes, for or against, alternately for or against the proposition. We'll then have 20 minutes for your contributions and questions. We won't be answering the questions at that point, but I'll then invite the lead proposer, Jenny, and the lead opposer, Avril, to sum up and answer some of the main points, each with 5 minutes more. We will then vote, and we will count those votes for the historic record. However, just to gauge how opinion may shift through the course of the discussion, and this is always fascinating to follow, let's have a show of hands now. We won't count it, just a show of hands as to what the mood is before we start the conversation. So, all those in favour of the proposition, and I'll read it to you again: this House believes that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner, and is therefore not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. So all those who at the moment agree with that, please show your hands. So I'm seeing about a dozen, would we say about a dozen colleagues? All those against that? Okay, well that's pretty overwhelming. Let's take abstentions just to note people who are undecided at the moment. Yeah, one or two. But clearly the mood of the House as we start is very much against the proposition. Let's see how we go. And let's start then with the lead proposer, and that's Dr. Jenny Preston. Jenny's consultant occupational therapist and clinical lead for neurological rehab at the Douglas Grant Rehabilitation Centre, Ayrshire Central Hospital. Jenny.
Thank you.
It's a long walk to the podium.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my absolute honour to stand here today to deliver the Elizabeth Casson Lecture. Oh, sorry. Wrong speech, just practising. The topic for our debate is this House believes that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner and is therefore not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. We, the affirmative team, define research as the systematic investigation into and the study of occupational therapy in order to establish facts, persuade, generate new knowledge, and reach new conclusions. On that basis, we, the affirmative, believe that this statement is true. Today, as first speaker, I will be talking to you about our responsibilities as occupational therapy practitioners to engage with research and the capacity and capability within occupational therapy practice to engage in research as part of our professional identity. Our second speaker will be talking about research from the perspective of a graduate occupational therapist within his first year of practice, applicability of research to our clinical populations, the diversity of career pathways, and the absence of research within the many definitions of occupational therapy. So to my first point. As part of the requirements of our professional codes of practice, all occupational therapists have a professional responsibility as research consumers to be aware of the value and importance of research as the basis for the profession's evidence base. Essentially, this debate is about the differences between engagement in research and engagement with research. Engagement in research involves a deliberate set of intellectual and practical activities undertaken by occupational therapists. Engagement with research, on the other hand, requires a less substantial involvement at individual or team level and is related to receiving and transmitting the findings of research. As occupational therapists, we are fully aware that our practice should be shaped or structured according to recognised theories, frameworks and concepts of occupational therapy. In practice, we do attempt to use national guidelines, research and other evidence to underpin and inform our practice. However, the quality of research evidence, accessibility, relevance and applicability to practice can make this extremely difficult. While it's recognised that implementation of evidence into clinical practice is a critical part of evidence-based practice, with an average 17 years for evidence to reach clinical practice, then we must challenge how current and contemporaneous our evidence base actually is. Yet changes in the way health and social care is being delivered, for example, increasing costs, reduced staffing levels, and shorter lengths of hospital admission, require timely incorporation of sufficiently rigorous and robust evidence. In the absence of relevant and reliable research evidence, occupational therapy practitioners must rely on clinical expertise and client values in making decisions about individual care. For experienced occupational therapy practitioners, there can be a perception that generating research evidence takes a long time to tell us what we already know. And therefore, conducting research while people need hands-on treatment or care is wasting resources. The money spent on research would be much better spent on additional clinical resources to help reduce the waiting times and to ensure that people get seen more often by an occupational therapist. Research engagement is conceptualised within the literature as a way of increasing the ability and willingness of various groups to use research. The underlying assumption is that if occupational therapists are involved in the creation and generation of evidence, they're more likely to use the evidence to inform practice and subsequently improve healthcare performance and health outcomes. However, there is little empirical evidence to support this hypothesis, and in fact, the limited evidence which does exist suggests any changes which do occur result in improvements in healthcare processes and not health outcomes. Occupational therapy practitioners already have a lack of time, with other work roles taking priority. They are poorly supported by managers who frequently have a lack of interest in research and therefore do not provide funding or support for occupational therapy practitioners to develop research skills. Within practice, there can be an underlying intimidation by research language and a lack of engagement with research for fear of getting it wrong. And now to my second point. In 2017, less than 1% of the UK registered occupational therapists had research training to doctoral level. Therefore, this robustly supports the motion that research is not core to occupational therapy practice. There continues to be limited opportunities for occupational therapy practitioners to engage in research, both in terms of skill development and accessing support and mentorship. Whether we like it or not, engaging in research as occupational therapy practitioners continues to be an elite sport, reserved for the chosen few, and is still far from being core to occupational therapy practice. The practicalities of engaging in research within clinical roles remains particularly challenging. At a time of unprecedented demand on occupational therapy services, practitioners are constantly faced with the challenges of managing heavy and complex caseloads with limited resources, and inevitably prioritise the clinical needs. Repeatedly, we hear of occupational therapy practitioners who aspire to a career in which they can incorporate clinical practice with research, carrying out academic modules or undertaking research training within their own time, on top of their clinical role and with no additional funding. Staff shortages lead to increased caseloads and impact on the ability to progress research projects. The skills required to create rigorous, credible and trustworthy evidence require postgraduate development, and currently opportunities for practice-based occupational therapists to develop research skills and pursue clinical academic careers are particularly limited. Similarly, we are not growing researchers within the profession, as many pre-registration students do not have the opportunity to develop meaningful research skills, as they are required only to produce research proposals or rapid, non-systematic literature reviews. So how does occupational therapy define a professional identity that supports occupational therapists to manage job stress, supports career longevity, prevents role blurring, and advocates for occupation-based practice? Professional identity is concerned not only about how individuals perceive themselves, but also with how they are perceived by others. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Turner and Alsop in 2015 noted that within the occupational therapy literature, generally, there is a focus on negative rather than positive issues surrounding professional identity, which suggests that these issues may reflect feelings of professional insecurity. Turner and Alsop postulate that a maturing profession like occupational therapy should be comfortable with the fact that this paradigm differs from more dominant discourses. This side of the House believes that occupational therapy as a profession does not perceive itself as a mature profession with a clear self-identity and sense of self in relation to research. Currently, we lack sufficient opportunities and infrastructure to enhance the academic status of occupational therapy as a profession, subsequently impacting on the calibre of evidence, the research profile, and the wider impact on research assessment exercises. On that basis, the responsibility for developing a professional identity as a mature profession in relation to research goes well beyond occupational therapy practitioners and will require significant and substantial strategic direction and investment as a profession. Research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner and therefore is not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. So Jenny argues that there's an important difference between engaging with research and engaging in research. She points out rather tartly that research takes a long time to tell us what we already know, and observes that less than 1% of practitioners have research training to doctoral level. So can in that context it be considered core? Let us see. Let us now hear the lead opposer of the motion. This is Professor Avril Drummond Deputy Head of School and Professor of Healthcare Research at the University of Nottingham. Avril.
Thank you. Thank you to the Chair, and thank you to the RCOT for inviting me to speak today. So good try, Jenny, good try. So I really want to really go after the people who aren't supporting us. I'm really happy that so many people have voted against this motion, but I think it's really important that we have a very high vote in this, and I'm going all out for that. So there are essentially 4 points that I want to make to you today about this area. So the first point is that we can be involved in all levels of research. Now, Jenny has used some very clever semantics, but it really doesn't matter. What we are saying is that research is core to what we do. And at one level, yes, you can have an academic professor or clinical academics, but you also need occupational therapists out there clinically. And let's remember that's what OT is about. So we're not trying to turn everyone into researchers. We're saying that OTs out there on the coalface, they need to facilitate, support, and participate in research. And that may be as blunt as recruiting people for studies, or supporting colleagues who are undertaking research, or participating in research. But at the very least, at the absolute minimum, is that there is a requirement that you're reading your professional journal and that you're reading other clinical journals that are relevant to your area so that you know what best practice is. You wouldn't go to the GP and him say to you, when I was in medical school 20 years ago, we tried this cream, it seemed to work. No, you'd expect him to know what the most up-to-date medicine was, and you'd expect him to know that because he went to conferences and trainings and because he probably looked at his BMJ now and again. So absolutely essential is the fact that we are reading journals and we're following clinical practice guidelines, which you remember are based on evidence. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, just a minor whisper to those people in the audience. You may just want to check the detail of your registration as professional occupational therapists and as members of RCOT. I really wish I could say to you, it's in the small print, it's pretty bold, and it says both explicitly and implicitly that you are there to deliver research findings clinically and to be aware of research methodologies. If you don't believe me, you can actually start looking at it now. But thirdly, and this is the area that I feel so strongly about, research is alive and well and breathing. Many of you aren't as old as me, lucky you, but in the past, there have been practices which we now know that we don't use. When I was a student occupational therapist, I saw many people with really nasty, unpleasant, painful contractures. We still see people today with contractures, but not as many. Yes, that's partly due to drug therapy, but it's also due to positioning. So that is part of rehabilitation in knowing how we position people and what we do to best manage them. If you had a heart attack 20 years ago, you were toast. That's a scientific term. You were toast. You were told you better take it easy for the rest of your life. Cardiac rehabilitation has revolutionized what we do with these people. We give them confidence, we give them a life back, we give them a change in lifestyle. Look at low back pain. Again, we used to tell people to rest. We know absolutely don't rest. Keep moving. Yes, it's painful, but we know from research that that pain is acceptable and you need to work through it. And this afternoon, a PhD student from Nottingham is going to present some results about whether we should use hip precautions. I was going to say you should go to that session, but maybe not all of you. The room isn't big enough. But really important evidence about whether we should still be using hip precautions so many years after they were started. The other thing, I've told you about all the positives, all the nice things. We're all nice people. We're all doing a nice job. And we therefore think it's going to result in a good outcome. But that's not true. And we absolutely have to be cited on the things that go wrong and the things that are unintended consequences of what we're doing. Let me give you a really good example. 2 years ago, the Evert Trial was published in Australia. This was the biggest trial in stroke rehabilitation, over 2,000 people from around the world. And it was a randomized control trial. In other words, people were allocated by chance to the group that they were in. And the hypothesis was that if you got people up early after their stroke, that they would do better in terms of their outcome. Now, for those of you who don't know the results of that trial, that seems a fairly obvious thing. That's what we're doing in cardiac rehab. That's what we're doing with low back pain. It's not obvious at all. The results were really shocking. The results showed that completely opposite to what people had thought. If you were in the group that was got up early, at 3 months, you were more likely to be more disabled, and get this, you were more likely to be dead. So rehabilitation has got consequences that you have to know about. On the basis of that trial, that evidence is now permeating in clinical guidelines around the world. But I'd say to you, forget 17 years. If you're a clinical OT in a stroke unit, in a hyperacute stroke unit, and you're getting your patients up in the first 24 hours, you could find yourself at the end of a lawsuit because the evidence is very credible. We know that rehabilitation has unintended consequences, and we have to have sight of them. Let me give you another example. So you have a patient who is chair-bound, who's a falls risk. In order to improve their quality of life, you get that person up, moving around, minor transfers, doing activities. Because they're doing activities, they fall. They've fractured their hip, they need surgery. They have surgery, they die. The chain of events, you cannot argue, the chain of events is from the rehabilitation. That's why that person died. If you'd left them in their seat, they wouldn't be dead. Now, I absolutely accept the moral and quality of life arguments around that, but we have to be cited on what these other issues are so that we can make informed decisions about what our practice is. And most of what I've talked about has been much more trial-based, but some excellent qualitative research out there, some absolutely key research to undermining why trials perhaps didn't work or what went wrong in a study. And these are really important snippets of people's lives, practitioners. We did a study about bed sensors, and the study didn't seem to work when we expected it to work. But when we talked to the staff, the in-depth interviews really gave us insight to the challenges that staff had in implementing that research. And of course, research is dry if we don't bring it into practice, but we are better at getting it into practice. And the fourth point that I want to make is, for heaven's sake, get a grip, guys. This is our national conference. Do you really want the message to get out there to OTs in the rest of the UK and internationally that we do not see research as being core to what we do and to our professional identity? Do you want us to be seen as the WRVS and the League of Friends? I'm not knocking either of those institutions, but actually that's the level of status that you will give us. And more important to me is the fact that we really need to think about our credibility and our standing with other allied health professions and within nursing and within medicine. Yes, we are behind the curve in terms of our career development and in terms of the opportunity, but we are getting there. And exponentially, the rise in people involved in research and the production of research is absolutely fabulous. And I would just like to say to you, if you have a moment, you really need to go and see some of the posters. There are some cracking posters up there from the OT community, from clinicians, and that shows that research is at the core of what we do. So I'm asking you to keep the faith, to keep the vote in our favour, and for those of you who actually made a sad mistake, this time, unlike, dare we say, the B word, you get a second chance. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Avril. Giving no quarter, she wants to maximise the vote on this, taking no prisoners, and I'm sure we all agree that WRVS and the League of Friends are fine organisations, for the record. It's everyone's responsibility. It's in your professional registration that you need to be deliver research findings. It's absolutely core to what you do, and you need to get a grip and not let the outside world see that you are dissing a research. So, let's see what Rob Malloy is going to answer to that. Rob's speaking for the motion. Rob's a Band 5 occupational therapist at the Hillingdon Child Development Centre at the Central and North West London NHS Foundation Trust. Rob.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that was interesting. I'm here today to further support the arguments that Jenny has outlined, that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner, and that therefore it's not part of our professional identity. I'm going to bring a different perspective to Jenny and the other speakers from the experience of a practitioner just a few months into his career as an occupational therapist. I'll be honest, when I first read the motion, I was a little bit apprehensive. How can I argue against research? How can I suggest that research is not needed or not important? Having just a few months ago completed my studies, which included a research-based dissertation, I believe strongly that research is vital to our profession. And I had similar reactions from colleagues and friends, and many of you may be thinking the same thing. Surely research is important. As Jenny has clearly stated, and we all know, our practice as occupational therapists should be informed by research. But as I delved further into this topic, it became clear that this debate is not about whether research is important or not, but about whether it's core to being an occupational therapy practitioner, focusing here on practitioner. While some might argue that occupational therapists should be engaged in research and not just with research, there are certain issues that need to be addressed that Avril fails to consider. Jenny has already outlined some key challenges regarding resource availability in services and increased pressures, and explained the gap between evidence and practice. To explore this idea that Jenny has outlined further, we must consider whether the problem with engagement with research lies primarily with practitioners. Much of the research and evidence we're expected to apply into practice does not meet the needs and demographics of the complex populations we work with. Researchers, like some of our colleagues, are often found high up in their ivory towers, far removed from the daily realities of clinical practice. They've carefully selected population groups with much of the variance and comorbidities that exist in our daily clinical practice excluded from research. Those with cognitive impairments, communication difficulties, non-English speakers, and others are often excluded from studies. I, for one, rarely find a study that is directly applicable to my work as a children's OT and the complex needs that I see. Evidence-based interventions for children with cerebral palsy and autism, children with handwriting difficulties without English as a first language, and learning disabilities. This research is so narrow. How then can it be a core part of my professional identity if it is not easily applicable to my work? Furthermore, research always tends to lead to more unanswered questions, more time and more money needing to be spent to deliver what our population groups need. As Jenny has outlined, would we be better off investing in additional clinical resources to reduce wait times and ensure people who need it are seen more by an occupational therapist? Is the problem here less about incorporating research as core to being an occupational therapy practitioner and more about ensuring that the research that is carried out is applicable to daily practice and more easily utilized? Where's all this time going to come from for occupational therapists to be engaged in research that Avril is demanding? That's just another example of this ivory tower thinking. This side of the House is arguing that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner, but we're not suggesting that it's not important, but just not core to being a practitioner. Research is and should be core to being an occupational therapy academic, a researcher, or an occupational scientist. And these are important roles within our discipline. You may be aware, and as Suzanne mentioned yesterday, that Health Education England have developed a resource called the Universe of Opportunities, which is distinguished between 8 different career pathways for AHPs, including clinical, research, education, managerial, and leadership. A clinician or practitioner describes many of us here today who work day in and day out with the public, be that with children, adults, or older people, in schools, hospitals, homes, or prisons. Clinical work here is seen as a different role and career pathway to being a researcher. And whilst there appears to be a growing number of occupational therapists who are able to combine more than one pathway into a, so to speak, a la carte career, such as with clinical academics, there's a lot of difficulty in how this can be implemented, as Jenny has already said, with the resource restrictions. And there's a danger of identities and roles from being blurred and diluted. Speaking pragmatically, do we even have the skills to do this? And ideologically, do we all need to engage in every aspect of work? Avril's ideas are idealistic, but perhaps unrealistic for every OT to take part in this. Do we have the skills? And she's failed to address how we can build up these skills amongst the profession. I wonder who we're allowing to define our professional identity. There's already enough confusion as to what our role is as occupational therapists, what defines us, what we do, compared to this overwhelmingly medical model-based world in which we work. If we allow our professional identity to be defined by what is around us, we'll be focused on outputs and numbers, and we can easily lose sight of what is important. Asking the people we work with what's important to them. Avril seems so concerned with how others view us, there's less about what's important for the people we work with. We need to be careful how our professional identity is formed and shaped, and the specific qualities we consider to be core and essential. There's been confusion about our professional identity since our profession first began 100 years ago, and it continues to this day. Non-occupation-based approaches were embraced within our profession, perhaps to gain acceptance or to fit in with this medical model world. We should focus our professional identity on occupation rather than research. Many key definitions of occupational therapy do not mention research, such as the World Federation of Occupational Therapists definition and 97 of the 101 country member organizations. This speaks clearly and loudly that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner. The focus on these definitions is on supporting people and communities to engage in the occupations they want, need, or expected to do, an idea we're more than familiar with here. In conclusion, this side of the House believes that whilst research is important, it's not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner. In recent times, we've seen an important shift within the profession to take back a proud hold of occupation and the power of occupation to promote health and well-being. Let us agree to embrace this as core to our profession. If not, we're at risk of losing what makes us different from other professions, but more importantly, what's essential for the populations we work with. Research should therefore not be part of an occupational therapist professional identity. Thank you for listening.
So Rob seeks to inject a note of realism from on the ground, taking a shy at researchers in their ivory towers. Important questions about resource availability, time, funding. Can you do everything? Or is research really core only to academics, to clinical scientists and researchers? Our last speaker is speaking against the motion, and that's Natalie Jones from the Accountable Care Partnership, where she's program manager and place-based workforce lead at great acronym VICTA, the Visible Impact of Research Centre at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals.
Okay, I win for the longest job title. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 compelling arguments for this motion.
and share with you 3 reasons why I believe research needs to be core to occupational therapy practice and therefore integral to our professional identity. So a dictionary definition of core is heart of a fruit. So just as core is central to an apple's existence, research is central to the existence of occupational therapy practice. I believe that research yields the fruits that will nourish and sustain the life of our profession into the 21st century and beyond. So let me share with you 3 examples as to why I believe in research as core to the profession. My uncle Dave was diagnosed with bowel cancer last year. He asked me about participating in 2 studies and I encouraged him to do so. He wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for the opportunity to join a study and receive investigations that were not part of current service delivery. Research enables the trial of new treatments and new interventions, offering patients opportunities, choices and innovations that can transform and actually save lives. Secondly, as a manager in the NHS, clinical and cost effectiveness are of absolute paramount to my role. But as a practitioner, that's when I started to do research. I became a primary investigator on a study investigating the efficiency of Nintendo Wii to improve upper limb function. But it wasn't until I took part in that study that my eyes were truly open to the benefits, the challenges, and the perspective from the patient and the carer. This study and its outcomes fundamentally changed the way I thought about the use of technology in rehabilitation. It changed my practice and, importantly, gave me and clinicians options and choices, and for the patient, an evidence base. So thirdly, I've spent a year developing a research tool for the NHS. I've listened with fascination to patients, carers, clinicians and researchers about the impact that research has made to their lives. But it's not just the obvious outputs of research I'm talking about. It's the stuff that's really important and invisible, the difference it can make to people, services, improvements, teams, recruitment and retention. Research is a core ingredient of our professional life, and when it's missing, it's like serving up a Sunday roast without Yorkshire puddings in our house. It's just plain wrong. It's an essential component part, and I believe research needs to be hardwired into clinical roles, and it's integral and core to our everyday practice. So my first argument is around our obligation and professional responsibility to be research-informed, engaged and active. 12.1 and 12.2 of the HPCP standards for proficiency for OT require us to ensure the quality of our practice. As registered professionals, we invest in ourselves and take ownership of our professional destiny, and this is what defines us as practitioners. The 4th pillar of the RCOT Career Development Framework is dedicated to evidence, research and development. The framework describes research as core to our career. We are challenged to positively question our own practice and the practice of others to create opportunities and generate new knowledge. Using research evidence in our practice ensures treatment techniques are effective, that we're delivering clinically and cost-effective services, and it helps us to keep up to date and ensure that patients are informed about the choices of their treatments. So my current role is working in a CCG with commissioners. Commissioning services on a backdrop of constrained resources, scrutiny of quality, cost effectiveness. In these austere times, services are rationed and commissioning is determined by evidence. Therefore, we need to demonstrate that we're making best use of our resources and be evidenced in our practice. We must withstand critical analysis from other professions, from other people and sources, and be able to describe our unique selling point to managers and commissioners. We can't do that without a very strong evidence base. So here is the important bit. It's great news for us as OTs because we're all about outcomes that matter to the patient. But without the evidence, without this contribution, we will not be heard. We need to be evidence-based and outcome-focused in our practice so we can demonstrate to commissioning that requiring OT services is a no-brainer. So, my second argument is that we have the power to influence and shape our identity. Professional identity is created through beliefs, attitudes, values, motives, and experiences, and this is how we define ourselves as a profession. We need to ask ourselves, what's my professional identity in relation to research? Professional identity is not static, it's a fluid living concept, strongly influenced by how we see ourselves, how we perceive others, and how we are seen by society at large. Take a moment to visualise your professional identity. Imagine a barcode on the back of your neck. Beep! What would it read about you and your professional identity? Now consider your identity in relation to research. Are you a student, newly qualified, first taste of research, hungry for more, or frightened to death, never again? Are you an experienced clinician, evidenced in your practice? Are you an academic with research in your DNA? I believe research is core to everybody's business and everybody's practice, regardless of role, profession, or grade. According to E.L. James, there are 50 shades of grey. Well, I believe there are 50 shades of research engagement. So what's your involvement in the research continuum? Are you a research consumer, participator? Do you read literature, evaluate and translate into practice? Are you involved in design or telling patients about studies? If we don't engage with the research spectrum, we could suffer from a lack of professional identity. Among OTs, this can lead to a lack of ability to think strategically and be over-influenced by other professions, leading to us feeling undervalued. So this is a call to action. Take responsibility for your professional identity and how you see yourself in relation to research. Influence how others see you. Research is core to your practice. It is part of your professional identity. And OT Research Matters. Please hashtag OT Research Matters and share with us your stories. So my third argument is research is core to our history, our today, and our future survival. On my bookcase at home, I've got the volumes of Occupation by Health by Anne Wilcox, the history of OT to its earliest times. Yet, occupation was around in biblical times, so we have been doing things around research, actually since 1944. Homersley wrote, "What we need, I feel, is to be more scientific and critical in our attitudes towards our work. If not, we'll slip back 20 years and find ourselves damned once more with the arty crafty label." I have to say, when I read that, I thought it said arty farty. But so, flash forward to today. There are pathways, there are all sorts of ways you can get involved in research. There are a multitude of strategies, guidelines and policies with a mandate to create research knowledge in our clinical practice. Our world is changed. It's not unrealistic to expect you to know what the best evidence is. It's no longer good enough to say something works. We need evidence to prove it. And it's no longer good enough to say, I'm not interested in research, or research isn't part of my job, or research, there's none of it available. We actually need to go out there and create it. Without this, we will not thrive and survive as a profession, and we will not be able to evolve into a brighter future. Thank you.
So Natalie sums up gloriously for the team speaking against the motion. Research is the thing that will yield the fruit that will nourish the profession going forward, but at the same time it's the Yorkshire puddings with your Sunday roast. Doesn't have to be all or nothing. There are 50 shades of research engagement. You can come at this in all kinds of ways, but you need to be doing it. So, thanks to our speakers, we're actually slightly ahead of time, so we've got good opportunity now for your points. I think I can summarize the two cases very crudely. For the motion, it's a resource question. Is it getting in the way of, if you do research as well as deliver the service, is it getting in the way of the latter? And is it something that's best done with researchers and left to the experts, the academic experts, I guess? Against, practice has got to be evidence-based, outcome-focused. It should run through what you do, like the lettering really in a stick of rock. And it's also important to know from research what doesn't work, what are the unintended consequences, as well as what does. So I think those are very crudely where the two camps are coming from. As I said, we want to hear now from you. We've got 4 mics around the room. Stick your hand up. We'll come to you. If you could say who you are and where you're from, that would be great. Particularly interested to hear your experiences of research, good and bad, and perhaps you might like to offer a reflection on how you juggle research or not with the rest of your role. So over to you, if I can. A hand right at the back, the gentleman in the black T-shirt, if we can have him first. Blue is it? I'm so sorry.
It's black.
I'm glad blue is a funny colour. I'm glad I went for that one. So my name's Keir Hardy, and I work as a lead therapist in Cheshire and Wirral, and I work for myself as well. Really enjoyed the articulate and enthusiastic arguments that people put forward. I wanted, and I've done a master's in personality disorder, so I've done some qualitative research that I'm looking to publish soon. What I wanted to ask was that if we did take the idea that research isn't a core part of OT and we put that to the side, how quickly could we achieve the same status as maybe homeopathy or crystal healing?
Okay, what's the opportunity cost? I think Kira is asking there. Let's have another reflection question. Yes, halfway up here. That's right, number 2. Thank you.
Hi. On? Testing? Yes. I'm Amy Stringer. I am from Canada, but from Oxford. And I was just wondering, in America, they're moving more towards requiring a doctorate to practice OT. And obviously, that's a lot of years of training and a lot of years of study and skills and money. And they're obviously developing lots of research skills through that and becoming well-equipped researchers. However, in the UK, we're obviously moving towards an apprenticeship model of education. And I'm not sure if it's just me, but when I think of apprenticeships, I don't think so much about research. I think about hands-on learning and the human aspects of our profession, which is relationships and occupation and knowing that activity is healing in and of itself. So I do agree that research is absolutely imperative for us to be engaging with, but I don't know if necessarily engaging in, just because of when you're a full-time OT working in the NHS, there's not, I mean, I know people make time for it, but I'm just confused. If we're moving towards an apprenticeship model, how can we be demanding that it's core to our profession?
Interesting point. Is the training model moving, taking you away from a research discipline? Yes, a hand in the middle there. Can we, red shirt? Do indicate, and we'll try and line up two or three more.
Hi, thank you. My name's Lara. I'm a lecturer at Cardiff University. I voted against the motion. I think that research is and should be core to occupational therapy practice and identity. But there are barriers. I studied my master's while I was working full-time. I self-funded. I was not given any study leave to complete that. Without that, I wouldn't be in the role that I am at the moment. And speaking with students, I think that the occupational therapy profession, they see their their future in being in practice and maybe not seeing the variety of occupational therapy roles like being in academia. But I think it should be hardwired into practice. But for those who are in practice, they do need to be involved in research, but there isn't the support there sometimes from managers, there isn't the resources. So my question really would be, how do we make research more of the norm within our practice and our profession?
Just keep the mic. Just tell us what would have helped you in terms of support while you were juggling both.
I think ultimately I understood the restrictions of services and the need for resources to go into patient care. So to a certain extent, I wasn't expecting funding and money, but what would have been really helpful would have been support from colleagues and managers around research and the importance of research, and for it to be embedded into our practice more, and as I say, for it to be the norm, to be being discussed, to be questioning our practice, and to not be afraid to question and not be afraid to make changes if they're necessary.
Interesting. Thank you. We might get some more reflections on that. So right at the front, and then we'll come to you there.
So I'm Laura de Bonner. I'm a clinical academic occupational therapist from the Sheffield Massive. So I am funded by the NHS, and I've only got to where I am. I do have those opportunities. My master's was funded by the NHS. I'm funded to develop an application to a PhD, which I hope will be funded by the NHS. So I have had those opportunities. But what drives me to work in research is I'm also a service user, and I'm a carer. And sorry, I get tearful when I say this, but receiving care is terrifying. Receiving care is horrible. The thought of receiving care from someone who is not up to speed with the latest evidence, who provides ineffective care, is just terrible. And as Nat said about her uncle being alive, well, me too, actually, and only because, not just because of research, but because research is everyday practice, and it's that everyday practice of research where that is normal treatment, that's what keeps people like me alive. And that's what motivates me.
Pink jumper in the middle there, but question, just my reflection on that last point would be, is being up to date the same as doing research? I don't know. Yes?
I'm not sure who's going. Hi, my name is Tanya, and I'm very lucky to work in academia and clinical management as well. And my question, I suppose, is for Rob, who I think, well done, because I think this must be the most daunting experience to argue for something that is really quite contentious. But I suppose my question to you is, for those who are familiar with the story of the little red hen, and if you're not, read it. It's very, very cute and very simple. But the bottom line is that you mentioned this idea of the research that's there is not applicable to the real-day challenges in your clinical practice. So I suppose my question then is, for all of those clinicians who say that, well, what are you doing about it? How are you helping people who are trying to push studies forward that is really clinically relevant, and how are you helping that link to make that happen and to make the research that is being generated clinically relevant and applicable? Everyone has a role to play, so, but well done.
Thank you. Rob, you may wish to respond to that in your well, you don't get 5 minutes, do you? You'll have to consult. To find her after. Yeah. Yes.
Levy, I'm a professional lead occupational therapist, and I just wanted to reflect that as a leader and a manager within NHS services, I did want to defend those of us that do actually support research. And I suppose it's around the fact that it might not necessarily be through participation of leading research, but participating in a sense of allowing teams to participate, opening your doors as a service to allow researchers in to use our expert access to clients to enable that to happen. And I suppose I wanted to ask the question and pose the question, how big should the Yorkshire pudding be?
There's a couple of hands over there. So first of all, yes, and then we'll come to the one in front.
Thank you. I'm Susan Core, and I'm head of research and development in an NHS trust. And one of the biggest challenges my team have is that academics approach us with the desire to engage our service users as participants in studies. And the challenge we've got is that they haven't worked with our local clinicians to plan those studies. I'm just reiterating points that are already made, really. So how can we help the academics link in and connect and co-produce with our clinical colleagues so that we really are doing research that reflects the real world?
Thank you. Yeah, relevant research, that's what we need. Yes.
Hi, I'm Naomi Gallant. I've just finished my doctoral research as a clinical academic role, and I manage a team. So I'm fully aware of the barriers that are there in the workplace with resources and time. But my question would, I really appreciated that analogy of the 50 shades, because I think, like with the leadership lecture we heard, leadership can be at all levels, and I think so can research. And so my question would be, actually, although barriers are there with resources and time and funding, is that actually a reason why it shouldn't be a core to our profession?
Thank you. Out of interest, how many people in the room consider themselves to be actively engaged in research of some kind? That's, what do we think, about half? A little more? Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. If you wanted to tell us about what you do, that would be interesting. Now, yes, a hand down here.
Hi, my name's Sharon. I'm a lead for children's services in Wales. I've recently finished a research project regarding how to help children with autism in their first appointments with occupational therapists. And in my role, I've been in this new role now for about 12 months, and something I'm discovering is that money does matter. We don't have many resources. Those resources are really important, and I wonder whether we need to think about research and how it saves money. So my research project, the outcome has been that children and families, particularly parents, have really appreciated that initial engagement, that phone call regarding what their child might need in those first appointments when they come to the Children's Centre. And what that's actually meant is that we spent less time with those children. So rather than perhaps 3 sessions to get to know that child, that family, to understand exactly what they need, really now it's just taking that one session and that one phone call. So we've saved money regarding that. We're now moving children through quicker, we're more focused, we really know what we need to do to make that difference. So I wonder whether it's been brilliant today, thank you, the discussions have been excellent, but when we think about occupation, participation, engagement, really considering what matters to us as occupational therapists that holds our identity, research is very much part of that. I don't see them as being separate, they come together, and actually coming together like that, and I think saving money, we just need to be selling it to other people that research will make us better, quicker at reaching those outcomes we need to get to. Thank you, that was all.
So good research ticks the efficiency box for the managers. Yes.
Hi, my name's Beth Ann Collins, and I'm in an ivory tower now, so I've been in academia for a while. But what I'd like to talk about is when I first went into practice. So I first went into practice and I was working what was called slow rehab. And I remember having a meeting with my supervision, with the manager, and saying, I'm not sure that I'm doing the right thing with these people. And so he said, brilliant manager, and what an amazing manager, said, well, what do you think you should do about it? And I said, I think I need to do some research. And he said, off you go. And I did. And that was within clinical practice. It was a busy clinical practice setting. And without that, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know whether what I was doing was right. And what would differentiate me, other than the reasoning, from the OT assistants or some of the other people? And unless we know what we're doing and we know why we're doing it, and research forms part of that reasoning, I would question whether we are professional.
But sorry, keep the mic. So when your manager said, off you go, did they say, and here's some time to do it, and here's a pot of money?
No, of course not. This is nearly 20 years ago now, so it's a while. And it was in Ireland, as opposed to in the UK, where resources are very, very tight. So the
austerity that we have here has been in Ireland for a bit longer. I know it was Celtic Tiger time, which is different. So no, there weren't the resources. But ethically, how could I continue to do things because that's just the way it's always been done? I see the same in my own work now. So my practice is now in education. How can I teach evidence-based practice if I'm not researching my own practice as well? How can that concept of who we are as professionals, we're able to think, I hope, but also what enables us to think, those building blocks, I think, relate to research.
Thank you. White jacket at the front. Oh, sorry, no, gentleman there, and we'll come to you.
Hi, I'm Chris. Just like Rob, I'm a newly qualified Band 5. I'm actually going to pick on you, Rob, and something you said. You're an easy target, sorry. Just something you said about...
You carry on, we're right behind you.
Thanks. Just something you said about research kind of being really more relevant to occupational scientists, for example. And actually, one of the things that that's ingrained into us while we're at uni is that we're not just practitioners, we're occupational therapists. And that encompasses being an occupational scientist, being innovators, being kind of like pioneers for change and trying to drive the profession forward. And research is very much at the core of that. So although we're practitioners, we're also occupational therapists, which is a whole bigger thing. And we all have that responsibility to incorporate research into what we do.
Thank you. Can you pass the mic forward? And then we'll come back to...
Hi, I'm Hortensia. I'm an occupational therapist at Evelina London Children's Hospital. I'm a clinical academic. I am going to support Rob on this one. And I actually voted, not for you guys, but I'm...
You've just undermined your whole career trajectory there.
I am changing. I am changing my mind. And I did an NIHR doctoral fellowship, and I finished a couple of years ago. And I think the lack of resources that people have talked about are there. You know, I've come back to clinical work doing exactly the same thing. There's no trajectory for occupational therapists in research to follow on. And I think what Rob said is really important. The research that loads of people are doing is not applicable to the community therapists that are seeing children, for example, with a variety of comorbidities, that the research doesn't apply. Our research methodologies, the RCTs, it was very well put, but I think you failed to mention all those RCTs and all that money is spent on RCTs that prove nothing and show nothing because the research is really poorly done. There was an RCT on Parkinson's where it showed that occupational therapy doesn't work, and that's because probably it was around dosage. So there's loads of, there's a lack of resources, but also I think what you guys are arguing is not so much that we don't believe in research, is that we have to be all doing research. And one of the limitations that, or the challenges that I had on my fellowship is that we were doing a study across the UK. And one of the key challenges was that we could not recruit occupational therapists, even though we were paying them, we were training them, we couldn't recruit them to be part of the study. Why? Because they felt it was unethical to give 10 sessions of occupational therapy to children, because normally they can give 1 session. So if we cannot even get clinical services right, you know, there's children across the country that have no input from occupational therapy. They have no access, you know, the services limiting access to children under 5 or over 12 or, I don't know, blonde and blue eyes. It's just like the resources are so limited for clinical services. So in a way, how can we have core research when we don't have even core services? And shouldn't we start with being involved in research, doing research with other people, you know, being in their studies, and then move on perhaps to the core, to being core. But at the moment, are we there yet? You know, do we need to sort out other things first?
Okay, thank you very much. That's put very clearly and succinctly.
Finally, some sense.
And the hand behind you there, and then on the other side of the aisle.
Hi, I'm Katie. I currently work at Leeds and York Partnership Trust, and I totally get that, you know, there's not the resources there and things like that. But I've recently been granted a place on an internship. So I get time off, I get my post backfilled. It's funded by Health Education England. There are opportunities out there. There's also, I know, Leeds Beckett, where I studied. They're also starting to offer internship posts which lead on to masters, doctorate. There are opportunities out there. It's just being able to obviously get that support from managers to be able to go on and do that and pursue that avenue.
Good, that's good to hear. And can you pass the mic across the aisle?
I was just thinking about the 50 Shades reference, and just if we're going to use...
Oh yes, which one?
if we're going to use the word core, like core is central, core. And when I think of a spectrum, I think of like the lightest gray and then like the darkest black, and people that are immersed in research every day, and like hardcore researchers that are super, super on the one end of the spectrum, and people that dabble in their journal every once in a while is on the very great. How can we call it core when there's such a spectrum of, you know, different ways that you're being involved? And before I vote, I do research, and I read my research all the time, so, like, don't judge, but yeah.
It's always worth researching the proposition and the actual wording, and you're absolutely right to point out that this point about core is key to what we're voting on. Now, let's go over here.
Hi, my name is Nicola. I've just completed my occupational therapy degree with London South Bank University. I just had a point to make really about the quality of research and evidence that's out there. As part of our course, we've just done a brief literature review where we looked at a topic of our choice, and I looked at forensic mental health, which is a passion of mine. And I just noted that a lot of the evidence has been reviewed by RCOT as being quite low in terms of the quality. And this seems to be a problem in forensic mental health. I don't know if this is across the board. So I was wondering if there was a forum within RCOT or maybe an online forum where people can put together their ideas about research, so they could be a central place where, so perhaps studies, I mean, one of the main failings of these studies were the small sample sizes. So I was thinking that if people from different areas of the country, for example, or even internationally, were thinking about the same kinds of studies, whether that could be put together so people could be carrying out the same studies to increase that evidence base, and also provide a forum back and forth, as somebody else mentioned, between researchers and people participating in research to make sure that research is applicable to practice and cutting edge, and you know, that people are passionate about, and it is something that's required for what we're going to do day to day.
Thank you. So is there something that the Royal College can do to help facilitate the research? Thank you for that point. Now, there was a hand, I think, behind you, yes?
Hi, I'm Nick, and I've just finished the NIHR MRes at Coventry, and my subject was looking at how smart devices might enable younger people with dementia to enable occupation. And so I suppose my point is something which other people have echoed as well. So recognising the challenges, the limits, the constraint on services, etc. Where do we put our priorities? But actually, a point that you raised, Rob, about the evidence out there not being applicable to some of these marginalised communities. Well, that's where my journey started, actually, was working with somebody who was exactly in that category and going into the evidence, which I hadn't done before because, as many have said, I thought that was an ivory tower occupation that I wasn't interested in. But the marginalisation and discrimination that I was seeing for younger people with dementia forced me to look. And I think that's what probably a lot of our journey started that way, is actually person-centeredness, again, which is core to our profession. And, you know, and that driving me to look and inquire and finding a massive gap, not only of the voice of people across the board with dementia in terms of research for people with dementia, but in particular younger people with the condition. And you know, that is, we have to allow our inspiration and our clinical practice and the gaps that we see to move us into these places. And as other people have said, there are opportunities out there. I didn't know where they were either, but as soon as you start to think that we need to do something about this, why should it be someone else's job to look at that? Why should it be somebody else inquiring about these marginalised groups of people who need OT inquiries? And what startled me about our trust, I work in a mental health trust in Coventry, and when you look at the trust and the diversity of staff group and the multidisciplinary investment there into client care, and then you compare that with the research going on in the trust, it is shocking. You know, it's all medic-led with a few psychologists and nurses coming along. You know, where are the therapists? Where are the support workers involved? Where are the social workers? You know, if we're saying this is multidisciplinary resource or space for people in terms of our clinical practice, why are we not also representing that in terms of the research going on in our trusts with more therapists coming along? And I would like to suggest that there is another option other than the Cold Front and Ivory Tower. I think we need to be forging a new space. And actually, if our founding members of our profession were put off because there was lack of opportunities or there was barriers in the way, then would we be here today? I mean, the point is of a barrier is that we look for ways around it, right? We look to collaborate and find new ideas, new initiatives, new resources that enable us to move forward and find these answers.
Thank you very much. So time for some fresh thinking about research and how we set about it. Now, we've got 3 or 4, a couple more minutes left, I think. Some final points. Yes, a hand over there.
My name is Andy Borrell. I'm a student from the University of Central Lancashire studying a Masters. My question isn't so much to do with the fact that research is integral to the profession. I think it's pretty consensus that we agree that it's core to what we do and core to best practice. My question is, does what we do have to be what we are? The second part of the debate reads, is it part of our professional identity? And I think if we lose the individuals in the room and start saying it has to be part of your identity as an OT, then I question, do we lose what we are as a profession itself?
Is it a zero-sum game? If you add that in, does something else have to go out? Was there a hand over there? Yes. And then we'll go down there.
Hi there, my name is Sheena White. I've been around for a few years, I have to say. I've worked in practice. I've also had a research post. I also worked for a year in academia, and I've been a manager for the last 10 years. Fascinated by the discussions just now. It's really interesting, and I find it quite frightening that the reality is we don't do research in clinical work a lot of the time because there isn't the money and the funding, but actually it's not optional. And so flip it over on the continuum of whether you dabble in your journal or whether you're actually you're doing a research post. I think we haven't talked about professional supervision, and I think that's fundamental to supporting staff all the way through their career to visit and look at research on a regular basis, and that's part of the career development, and that needs to be really emphasised.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take that hand and then 2 more, and that'll probably be about it.
Okay, my name's Una, and I've just finished a Bachelor of Science at Brunel University. And one of the questions I have, I think probably 50% of my course was based on research methods and related topics to research, which obviously is valuable in this context, but I do question whether actually I would have been better off learning some of the fundamental skills I need as a novice practitioner. And the other kind of point is that within an academic framework, I wonder whether there is quite a lot of academic hubris or arrogance around some of our kind of debates and the access into the profession. And I know within my course we've lost a lot of people who would have been very, very good therapists because they just were pipped at the post at some fairly minor academic standard. So, you know, does my effectiveness as a practitioner, is it measured by whether my referencing list is absolutely perfect? I wonder, and I just wonder whether actually in this whole debate about research and evidence-based. We just need to be a little bit more accessible, I suppose, take down some of those barriers that exclude many, many very good therapists from being part of the profession.
Thank you. Hand there, and then I think there was one in the middle. Yeah.
I think I'm in a rarity in this room that I'm actually a practitioner, and I'll not pretend I understand the 50 Shades of Grey. You know, I don't know anything about that. I just wonder that as a practitioner, it's often that you have ideas for service improvement and things, but you get bogged down with the bureaucracy and everything that often comes along with research. So if you're more in the practitioner area and you have the ideas, surely it's a case of using people that have got more expertise in the research and collaborating with them to get through some of the barriers and pitfalls that may stop you doing research, and a case of working together rather than kind of making it core to me. If I want to change something and something that should be researched, I'm probably not the right person to do the skills on my own because of the sheer time it would take up and the way it'd impede my clinical practice. So in that case, it's a case of using somebody that's got a different bias to myself that can help with that to make my involvement, more relevant to me.
Thank you very much. And then I think, okay, we'll squeeze both of those hands in, and then we'll finish. So the colleague in the pink top, and then the lady. Hang on, wait for the mic.
I just also want to mention things like processes like IRAS and so on and so forth. I genuinely think they put people off, and they make access to engaging in research completely, frightening and inaccessible. And perhaps maybe off the back of this, having support through the college, if people are wanting to navigate those systems, that could, and I'm sure there is, and I might not just be aware of it, but just the paperwork, as what somebody in the earlier session today said, you need a degree just to get ethical approval.
You don't even want to start me on IRS,
yeah.
But that's a completely different topic.
But that's what I'm saying. It's enough to make people cry before you even start. So certainly, I think if we as a community could support people who don't want to deal with that side of things, then maybe we could bring down those barriers a bit more.
Hearing that very clearly, thank you. And this is the last point, I think.
Hi there, I'm Elizabeth Wainwright. I work clinically in the gender clinic in Sheffield. The gender identity is a very under-researched area, so I do my day-to-day job in an area with very limited evidence base. And like Ben was saying, that, or is it, sorry, the other lady for the for argument, what you do is kind of drive your clinical practice based on experience and those client values. And although that does, lead you to be an expert in what it is you do, you can't do this forever, and it's got to move forward. So you've got to put the research down, you've got to put those arguments down to be able for the next people to come through and build on that. So that was one of my points. I think the other one is that we are really good, and we've heard loads in this conference about quality improvement initiatives and quality improvement. And actually research doesn't have to just be through the ethical process and the big trials. It's what we're doing all the time. There's lots of quality initiatives, asking our service users, getting that feedback loop and doing something with the feedback. That is research in day-to-day practice. What we're not so good at is actually publishing that and actually turning that into something that's written and for the OT community. So if there's any help from RCOT about how we can, instead of my quality initiatives being in my cupboard in my room, turning it into something that is there and accessible. So that's one of the other points. Finally...
briefly, if you will.
Yeah, there is a South Yorkshire study that's happening, which is part of our trust, the Working Win study, and it's wanting to reach 6,000 people, and it is an RCT trial. And again, like the lady at the front was saying, you've got to open your team up to be able to get your participants into those studies. So I think clinically we can offer our participants into larger studies like that. And I think it's just clear that you can't do this on your own. If we're wanting to make an impact, we've got to collaborate. It can't just be one person doing the doctoral on a question that's an interesting question. We've got to collaborate across different sectors for it to be meaningful for the profession. So
Thank you very
That's
much.
it.
That's a very appropriate point to conclude on. Thank you for all your contributions. I think that's added enormously to the quality of the debate we're having. It now falls to our lead proposer and lead opposer to sum up, and they've each got 5 minutes, so we'll start with Jenny Preston for the motion. And just to remind you, this House believes that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner and is therefore not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. Jenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. You've now heard the arguments, both for and against the motion. Now it's time for you to draw your own conclusions. However, before we do, I'd like to take this opportunity to summarise the arguments for the motion that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner and is therefore not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. We're amongst friends. Rob and I knew this was going to be difficult, but we like a challenge. But I never expected to be engaged in a debate about Christian Grey or Yorkshire puddings. We appeal to you not to be swayed by personality, wit, reputation, but you will make your own minds up. So we, the affirmative team, have outlined the differences between engagement in research and engagement with research. We have challenged the quality and relevance of the evidence to inform our practice, and we have considered the capacity and capability within occupational therapy practice to engage in research. We've recognised, or we hope that you understand that we have recognised the importance of research. This is not a debate about the importance of research within the 4 pillars of practice and within different career pathways. We've heard from the opposition and from yourselves as the audience about the importance of good science. And the only way to ensure good science, of course, is to make sure that our scientists possess the most advanced and specialist knowledge and skills. We do need research, but we need research leaders that can strategically influence the research agenda, create cultures and support others to engage in research, and coordinate local, national and international research programmes. Forgive me if I'm mistaken, but that doesn't sound much like the average occupational therapy practitioner role. And the Royal College of Occupational Therapists Career Development Framework seems to agree. The opposition has reminded us that today's treatment was yesterday's research. If only that was the case. Getting research into clinical practice can be one of the biggest challenges, and at times can feel like our occupational therapy practitioners and our researchers exist within contrasting and competing systems. Researchers on the whole are not good at translating evidence into practice, often focusing on publication and then moving on. While occupational therapy practitioners are often expert at identifying the clinical questions, as we've heard, generally they require support to develop a research framework to answer those questions to ensure the best clinical outcomes for our service users. Throughout this debate, we have confirmed the importance of research for the profession of occupational therapy. It's because of this high level of importance that we argue that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner. If occupational therapy as a profession is seriously committed to developing the best science, then we need to support the growth and development of the best scientists. We would not expect every occupational therapy practitioner to be an expert clinician, manager, educator, and leader. Therefore, we should not expect them all to possess advanced level skills in research. Similarly, some of our most expert researchers, quite frankly, couldn't be let loose in clinical practice. Waiting for the response to that one. As a profession, we need to celebrate our diverse interests and skills while maximising opportunities for our distinct systems and cultures to coexist in harmony. So, Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this side of the House firmly believes that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner and is therefore not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And speaking against the motion... What did I miss? Avril Drummond from Nottingham.
So thank you very much, and thank you also for the opportunity to respond, and thank you for the comments that have come from the audience. So, I mean, the most important thing to say to you is that research is not perfect. Research is not perfect, but neither is clinical practice. And we have to be really careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, there are so many things about research that we need to improve, and implementation continues to be a big issue for us. But absolutely, research is core. I've heard a few things about how it's important, but these are just weasel words. This is semantics. It's core to what we do. And again, some of you younger people in the audience, you don't even realize that before you started in practice, that some of these treatments were new in my day. So, for example, I've given you the example of cardiac rehabilitation, of management of low back pain. We treated people with these conditions very differently 20 years ago. And now you think that this is part of your common clinical practice, and you probably don't appreciate what has gone into getting it to that point. Yes, there are issues about barriers. There are lots of barriers to doing research, but the people who want to do it, they find a way through. There are barriers clinically. You don't say, it's a bit difficult to get Mrs. Jones home today, maybe just leave it for a couple of days. No, you actually manage that discharge because you have to. You might have a face like a poker, you might shout at a few people, you might have to make telephone calls, but you manage it because you manage those barriers. Every day we have barriers in research, but it's really important that we keep pushing through them. A lot of the ethical issues that people have mentioned, yes, these are problems for us. They are problems for us in occupational therapy research, but we have to keep pushing. Yes, there are limitations in our methodologies, but we are getting better at delivering methodologies and developing them which will answer our questions. And sometimes, basically, people use the wrong methodology, or they ask really stupid questions which can't be answered. And that's not the fault of the methodology. Yes, we have problems because sometimes when we have negative results, it's difficult to get them published because people would much rather have a positive trial result. And yes, there has been money wasted in research, but there's been money wasted in clinical practice. What I say to that is that that research, as long as we learn from those mistakes and take it forward, that's really, really important. We are making a lot of medical advances these days. We have got soldiers coming back from wars with undescribable injuries. We are saving people's lives through thrombolysis and through clot retrieval. We are saving people that wouldn't be alive many years ago, and we need to keep up with how we manage these people and how we treat them. I absolutely take the point. I think this is your one good point. One good point was made about the fact that some of the research has a lot of exclusions, but actually you have to engage your brain. If you don't ask people to participate in a study because they don't speak English, because your questionnaires are in English, that seems to me a pretty pragmatic thing to do, because actually you're wasting that person's time and you're not going to get an outcome. But the question is the generalizability of that results. Does someone who doesn't speak English, and you have shown that given self-care to people in the early stages of their MS or their stroke is beneficial to them, do you really think it doesn't apply to them? Of course it does. You can't just read the detail, the level of the detail, and say, well, no, it doesn't apply to any of these people because they weren't in the study. But that is part of the issues of implementation. I think it is really important that we do embrace research. I recognise that there are challenges in it, but honestly, there isn't really a choice if we want to move forward as a condition. Today's research is tomorrow's clinical practice. What we are doing now, what we are recruiting for, will change our practice. Hopefully, and Jenny is right, the timescales have been too long, but we are getting better at getting it out there. And really, the point is down to the people who benefit from our services. The lady there said much more eloquently than I could, I don't want some incompetent OT coming out to see me when I'm in my care home. I just want to put that out there now. I want someone who knows what the research is, who can make really good choices about me. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is only one way to vote. We have to vote against the motion. We believe that research is central to OT and part of our identity. Thank you.
It is time to vote, and we are counting. So, for the nth time, and listen to the wording very carefully, this House believes that research is not core to being an occupational therapy practitioner and is therefore not part of an occupational therapist's professional identity. All those who agree with that. We are counting. Keep your hands up and keep them raised clearly.
We are collecting photographic evidence.
Don't be intimidated. Feel free.
Be intimidated. Be very intimidated. This is with a really broad Belfast accent. Be very intimidated.
I could do a better Glasgow one.
Have we got that, tell us? Are we still puzzling? We're there? Okay. All those against the proposition. Keep your hands up, please.
It's quite close. It's not close at all. Don't be stupid. That's why you need research. Counting is a basic requirement.
Okay, thank you very much. And abstentions. Anybody abstaining?
Oh, there's a few splinters of the bombs.
Oh, that's quite interesting.
I think it's been a swing to the abstentions.
Yes.
On the fence. Good.
Are we done? Thank you, tellers. Who's going to be?
Are you on the edge of your seat, Rob?
Yeah.
Is there a drum roll?
There wasn't the music earlier. We had some really quite good.
I don't know.
We're adding up now. I can see it from here.
I thought you actually had some bloody good arguments there.
I just say that into the mic.
No. I just complimented Rob and he wanted me to say it into the mic, but I'm not going to.
What about me?
I'll tell you later.
I will put something in your tea. You should know that I was accused on social media this morning of spiking Avril's tea ahead of this debate. I'm beginning to wonder.
And we're seconds away. Here we are. Okay. This looks suspiciously well-rounded. For the proposition 20, against the proposition 300, abstentions 22. So they're quite conclusive this year. One of the great things I enjoy about chairing this debate is that is to see how the view changes through the course of the 90 minutes. Probably hasn't changed that much this year, if we're honest, except for a slight swing to the abstentions, as I said. The other thing I enjoy is that occupational therapy, it strikes me, is still a very young profession, and it's great to be still sort of finding its voice and crystallizing its purpose, and it's great to be here and to be part of that as you sort of think through the future. Thank you for coming and making it, such a vociferous debate, adding your voice to those of our panelists. Please give a very warm round of thanks to Jenny, Rob, Avril, and Natalie. I declare the motion conclusively defeated. Enjoy your lunch.